At dawn, on September 6th, the Generalissimo's message to the troops is read aloud to the soldiers of each unit. The sacred ground of France is to be held, whatever the cost. Better to die on the spot than retreat. The salvation of the country is in their hands. No weakness will be tolerated. Even the British feel drawn into the passion of the moment. Sir John records in his diary that this attack has sent a thrill of exultation and enthusiasm throughout the whole force. Henry Wilson tells a French officer that the Allied army will be in Germany in 4 weeks. All along the line, 980,000 French and 100,000 British troops square off against 750,000 Germans. Germany had started the campaign with a 1.2 to 1 numerical advantage, but now the numbers have swung in France's favour. Logistical problems have also started to bedevil the Germans. Dead horses clogging the roads, boots with worn-out soles, a shortage of bullets and shells. First Army is 87 miles from the closest railhead. The whole German line is stretched across a salient from Paris to Verdun, like an elastic band ready to snap. Now is the time to strike. As the dawn's first light breaks through the clouds, the cannons thunder, the bugles cry, and the soldiers charge into the breach like straw dogs to the sacrifice. The counterattack has begun. For weeks, the Generalissimo has motored back and forth across the countryside with his driver, but for the next 15 days, Joffre will remain ensconced in the small, cramped offices of his headquarters at Châtillon-sur-Seine. Like ganglia at an intersection of numerous outstretched nerves, he will read every important telegram, take every call, and meet with a revolving door of envoys, all reporting critical information to him, and which he will, in turn, redirect back out to his officers at the front. His headquarters is now the central nervous system of this vast battle, taking place over 200 miles of French soil. The only breaks he will receive will be from sleep, meals, and a daily mile or two walk for exercise. At the front, the fighting west of the Ourcq is as intense as yesterday. The general in charge of the French 6th Army is Joseph Joffre, a small, svelte man, dragged out of retirement by the war. He had been an artillerist for most of his career, and is, perhaps, out of his element when leading a full-sized army. He sends the 55th Reserve Infantry Division and the Moroccan Brigade into action against the German left flank. The German 2nd Corps, recently arrived from its night march, counters with heavy artillery fire. After this initial skirmish, the two armies erupt into a murderous firefight. Artillery strikes and infantry charges are ordered variously, as commanders on both sides hope to seize the initiative and set the pace for the ensuing combat. The French initially gain ground, but are driven back, and by nightfall both sides wait exhausted and nervous for what tomorrow might bring. They hunker down for a short, tense rest. Although he does not know it, Manoury still has the numerical advantage after 2 days of furious combat. But the Germans have stubbornly prevented him from reaching his strategic objectives. 6th Army is still fighting west of the Ourcq River, which is not where it wants to be. For Joffre, the real crisis today is not on the left, but in the centre. The commander of the French 3rd Army is Maurice Sarrail, a socialist, Freemason, and outspoken Dreyfusard. Before the war, the socialist government had planned to replace Joffre as commander-in-chief with Sarrail on account of his left-wing credentials. but the war's outbreak had prevented the appointment. He has been aggressively promoted by left-wing elements in the government, going all the way back to 1911. Joffre, who is politically neutral and thinks military men should remain unaffiliated, has viewed Sarai with suspicion for a very long time. This morning, Joffre orders Sarai to strike the German Fifth Army along its eastern flank. Over the course of the day, however, it becomes clear that Sarai is clashing head-on with the German Fifth, mostly due to errors in reconnaissance that had failed to detect a shift in Fifth Army's direction. The French Third is badly mauled as a result. The 10th Infantry Division is obliterated. Its general is shot dead, while most of his staff and their critical papers are captured by the Germans. Third Army is in complete disarray. Joffre grows increasingly furious as the updates roll in. After reports of a dead general start crossing the line, Joffre snaps. The normally soft-spoken generalissimo writes a formal reprimand. Sarai's officers have no authority over their men. The soldiers have abandoned vital equipment. The staff officers are negligent. He orders Sarai to regain authority over Third Army by whatever means necessary. Joffre is tempted to fire Sarai on the spot, but the battle taking place is too desperate, too unforgiving for him to make abrupt changes. The centre must hold at all costs, otherwise the attack on the left flank will be for nothing. All Joffre can do is watch and wait for tomorrow. When dawn breaks over Franchet-Desprez's Fifth Army on September 7th, the soldiers are stunned. The opposition has fled. In the early morning darkness, the German Second Army withdrew the units on its right flank, fearing that they would shatter from a frontal assault. French soldiers rushed to capture the vacant ground, but meet resistance from one depleted battalion of the German 74th Reserve Division, which, in the confusion, had not received the order to retreat. The German stragglers are quickly surrounded. With their backs to the Petit Morin River, the Germans of this lone battalion cannot retreat. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, the soldiers tie white handkerchiefs to the ends of their rifles and attempt to surrender. The French are merciless. In the end, they gun down 450 Germans, attempting to surrender in what will come to be called the Guébaret Farm Massacre. For the French, this will not be a gentleman's war. Meanwhile, outside the suburbs of Paris, at 7 a.m., the French Sixth Army resumes its assault. The Germans, recently reinforced in the centre, unleash a concentrated barrage on the 63rd Reserve Infantry Division, followed by massed infantry charges. The French start to panic. The 6th centre begins to break. A so far undistinguished artillery officer, a half-English colonel named Robert Nivelle, repositions his 75mm cannons to point directly into the German infantry. The barrage he unleashes is furious and awe-inspiring. Firing 20 shells a minute into the attackers' lines, he breaks the German assault, and the French centre holds after a stirring counterattack. By next month, this unknown artillery officer will be a general. Sixth Army, however, is still nowhere near its objective after 3 days of savage fighting. For Joffre, directing the battle back at headquarters, there's time to piece together the day's strange events. The Fifth Army had been able to seize all that open territory because the German Second Army had withdrawn its right flank from the front. 2 corps, the German 3rd and 9th, had been poached by First Army to buttress its attack on the French 6th. This has, according to Joffre's calculations, expanded what was once a 20-mile gap to one that is now 30 miles in length. Joffre doesn't know how it happened, But this mistake has been caused by poor communication between the German generals of First and Second Armies. First Army seems to be taking one last desperate gamble. Rather than try to retreat to cover the gap, it's hoping to shatter the French Sixth before the sluggish BEF can exploit the opening. It's a bold move, but it can, in theory, be foiled. If the BEF move through the gap faster than expected and join the fight, the German gamble will fail. But the all-important question is, where are the BEF? The strategic map pinned to the wall in Joffre's office shows the British miles behind where they should be. This morning, they had snaked slowly out of the forests of Crécy, singing, "It's a long way to Tipperary." They had marched throughout the day with nothing but a few cavalry skirmishes to slow them down, yet they had advanced only 7 miles. Joffre knows he can't send an angry letter of reprimand to Sir John like he did with Sarai. He sees instead a vision of how the BEF can be prodded forward by holding hands with them, metaphorically speaking. The French Fifth must use its left flank to march alongside the British right to set the pace for the attack. By attacking into the gap together with the Fifth, the BEF can feel that their flank is secure. At around 4 in the afternoon, Joffre issues these orders as General Instruction Number 7. But the day is not done. Joffre receives an urgent telephone call from Second Army's Chief of Staff. The officer sounds panicked. Noël de Castelnau, Second Army's commander, has just ordered a retreat from Nancy. Joffre knows at once how frangible the situation is. First, his centre is under threat. Now it's his right flank. If Nancy falls, it will not only be a propaganda coup for the Germans, it could split First and Third Armies, with First Army's back pinned against the Swiss border. This can't be allowed to happen. Joffre can only wonder if Castelnau's judgment is being swayed by a tragedy very close to his heart. Castelnau has just lost one of his sons to the war. By the war's end, he'll have lost 3 of his 6 sons. After exchanging a few more words with the Chief of Staff, Joffre asks for Castelnau to come speak with him directly. When the general starts speaking over the line, he paints a very bleak picture. One whole corps is compromised, while another unit has been completely obliterated and lost control over a crucial location. Castelnau says, "If I try to hold on where I am, I feel that my army will be lost. We have to face the idea of immediately retreating." "Do nothing of the kind," Joffre insists. "Wait 24 hours. You don't know how things are going with the enemy. He's probably no better off than you are." The call is finished. Joffre dispatches an envoy to join Castelnau at Second Army headquarters and make sure the general's resolve does not waver. The Generalissimo can feel the decisive moment rapidly approaching. The fighting is reaching a crescendo. One side will have to break, and it will break soon. Franchet Desperat receives General Instruction Number 7 with a sigh. But the French bulldog is not one to shy away from a fight. His men are exhausted. He's exhausted. But the Fifth Army will attack, and if need be, it will drag the British into the fight alongside them. The general orders his left flank forward. Carrying out this attack falls on Louis de Mauduit of the 18th Corps. Like his commanding officer, Mauduit is not a genial, leisurely type. He will become famous for an event 5 days from now when a French deserter is captured and taken out to be shot. General de Mauduit will exhort the man to face his execution with courage, since, by dying, his death will deter future deserters, and thus work toward France's victory. He will say to the condemned man, "Yours also is a way of dying for France." To deal with the difficult task of maintaining the offensive, Mauduit orders a sustained artillery barrage throughout the night, one of the first night barrages of the war. For hours on end, the French carpet the German position with high explosives. The next day, September 8th, at around noon, the the soldiers of the 36th Infantry Division leap out of cover and charge the village of Marche-en-Brie. Its shell-shocked German defenders are forced to retreat. The village itself is not significant, but its capture is ominous for the Germans. Second Army's right wing is now so far outflanked to the west that they must fall back or risk the encirclement of an entire army corps. Second Army orders its right flank to withdraw 6 miles to the rear. Throughout the day, as the units retreat, it becomes clear that the Germans are making a bizarre mistake. The right flank of Second Army is no longer covering the gap, but has reassembled along a north-south axis, facing west. Second Army is trying to save its own skin, leaving First Army to its fate. The gap is now wide open for the BEF. Last night, while Fifth Army was unleashing its artillery barrage, to the north, Gallieni dispatched reinforcements from Paris to Maunery's Sixth Army. To rush the soldiers to the front, Gallieni sent them partly by train, partly by requisitioned taxis from the capital. Although the number of men sent by taxi pales in comparison to the numbers sent by rail, the country desperately needs heroes. Newspapers are praising the courageous taxi drivers who banded together to save the capital. Not much more than 3,000 soldiers were transported by taxi. Because of dark roads, dim lights, poor signage, and flat tires, most arrived late. Some had to walk as far as 1.5 miles to reach their destinations due to traffic congestion. Gallieni has been busy with other matters too. Without consulting Joffre, he had contacted the civilian government in Bordeaux about evacuating Paris. When the Generalissimo finds out what Gallieni has done, he cables Meilran in a white-hot fury. He demands that the war minister rescind the orders of Gallieni. Joffre writes unequivocally, "The military governor of Paris is under my orders, and therefore does not have the right to correspond directly with the government." The Generalissimo is not only having to fend off his flank from the Germans, now he's having to prevent being outflanked by one of his rivals. Meanwhile, the fighting outside Paris is bloody and thankless. The German First Army is so desperate that it has thrown all its might against the north flank of the Sixth, hoping to break it. Maunery also tries to flank the Germans from the north, but he gains no ground. In a telegram to Joffre, Maunery admits his army is maimed and exhausted, but he thinks it can continue to resist. So long as Maunery can hold his ground a little longer, Joffre knows that the BEF and the French Fifth will bring victory. The Generalissimo is no longer relying on the Sixth to do the work all by itself. But what are the BEF doing? At noon, the British had crossed the Petit Morin and fought a minor skirmish with some German cavalry. The pace had been acceptable until a thunderstorm brought the advance to a standstill. Over 3 days, the BEF have advanced a measly 25 miles, despite outnumbering their opponents 10-1. Joffre fires off a telegram to the BEF at around 8 in the evening. He explains to Sir John how the gap is now ripe for the offensive. It is essential that the BEF exploit this gap before the Germans can bring up infantry and artillery to fill it. Because he cannot order Sir John directly, he heavily suggests that the BEF move northeast tomorrow and cross the Marne. Before he can comfortably go to bed, Joffre has a gap in his own line he must fix. Throughout the day, Joffre has watched with anxiety as a gap between the French Third and Fourth Armies has widened. The last thing he wants is to exploit a gap in the German line while the Germans exploit a gap in his. Not long after sending his telegram to the BEF, Joffre wires another to Sarai at Third Army headquarters. He orders the general to shift west to remain in close contact with the French Fourth Army. Sarai petulantly refuses the order, claiming that he wants to stay in contact with Verdun. The fortress city of Verdun, however, is defended by 350 heavy guns and roughly 66,000 soldiers in heavily fortified positions. The fortress is not in danger, and by refusing Joffre's order, Sarai threatens to upend all the progress France has made so far. If the Germans slip through the gap, the French centre will be smashed. Sarai's arrogance has compromised the Generalissimo's plan and put hundreds of thousands of lives at risk. That evening, across the battle line, inside the German camp, serious discussions are taking place. Earlier in the day, the German General Staff in Luxembourg dispatched an envoy, an intelligence officer, named Richard Hensch, to take stock of the situation at the front. At the Château de Montmort, inside a small study cluttered with situation reports and penciled-over maps, Hensch is meeting with Second Army's top officers. Its commander, General Karl von Bülow, is speaking with a thin, anemic voice, his blue eyes dull with exhaustion, his face hanging like a dog's, left out in the rain. He explains to Hensch that Second Army's situation is extremely serious, dangerous even. After a month of attrition, supply shortages, and combat fatigue, Second Army is in no state to deliver the death blow that the German High Command wants it to deliver. Its right flank is collapsing. Unless First Army comes to its aid, there will be nothing to seal off the gap that has formed between them. At this point, a remarkable word is uttered. Bülow describes his army as Schlacker, or in English, cinders. He's using the word in this case to mean spent or ruined. In German, it's an unambiguous term that conveys at once the desperation of Second Army's condition. Bülow points out that the gap leaves the French with two equally potent options: exploit Second Army's right flank or First Army's left flank, either one of which will spell catastrophe for Germany. Hensch concurs with Bülow's grim assessment. Their voices are icy. The mood in the room is one of subdued disappointment, perhaps even fear. All present agree that if the Allies start to cross the River Marne in force, a general retreat will be necessary. The next morning, on September 9th, Hensch departs at around 6 a.m. He has decided to make the 50-mile drive to First Army headquarters to assess the situation there. About 3 hours later, General Bülow wakes from his slumber. The night's rest has brought no reprieve. He's as haggard and anxious as the night before. He immediately reviews the reconnaissance report his staff have prepared. Flyers have spotted 5 enemy columns marching north from the region of Montmirail-La Ferté. It's the British. For all their dithering and delaying, they're finally going to do it. They're going to cross the Marne today. Bülow's heart sinks. Second Army is potentially just 24 hours away from encirclement. To add insult to injury, on his right flank, he's outnumbered by the French 4-1. He feels compelled to act. Waiting could waste precious hours his army needs. Although Bülow has no way to know the significance of the decision that he's about to make, with hindsight, it will be obvious. This will become one of the most momentous decisions of the century. Millions will die, and several nations will be ruined because of this seemingly routine military decision. It is a snap judgment, taken in the early morning by a groggy and exhausted general who, some scholars suspect, might be suffering from advanced thyroid disorder. Bülow decides he cannot afford to wait to see the outcome of the day's fighting. Without consulting with the armies to the right or left of him, without consulting with the German General Staff, without even suffering a significant defeat on the battlefield, Bülow takes the full responsibility for this frightful action onto his shoulders. At 9:02 a.m. on September 9th, Karl von Bülow orders Second Army's retreat. Back at French headquarters, still ensconced in the pulsing hub of his office, Joffre is able to watch the dominoes fall into place with ever-increasing excitement. Aerial reconnaissance keeps track of troop movements along the Marne. German units are spotted marching in a northeasterly direction. At first, it only seems to be the German Second Army, but as the day wears on, It becomes clear after lunch that First Army too is joining the retreat. Still, there are dissatisfactions. The British are, of course, in the thick of these disappointments. The BEF begins its march at the crack of dawn and discovers, to its amazement, that during the night the Germans had failed to destroy several vital bridges across the Marne. The bridge immediately in front of the British advance, and the two to its west, have been demolished, but the bridges to the east remain intact. Locals report that the Germans in charge of blowing up that sector had got irredeemably drunk and forgot to detonate the explosives. Sir John sends cavalry units ahead to secure the intact bridges, but despite this windfall, the pace is infuriatingly slow. First Corps is halted until nightfall, from simply having spotted a few enemy cavalry units and a German baggage train. Despite vastly outnumbering its enemy, Second Corps engages only a few of its units in the fight, holding far too many in reserve. To the west, where the bridges have been demolished, Third Corps is delayed by clever German machine gun nests on slopes and in wooded ravines. To make matters worse, the pontoons they need to cross the Marne, about 80 yards wide in this location, are completely inadequate. Engineers string together makeshift bridges made of pontoons, requisitioned boats, and floating barrels. By nightfall, only half a division from Third Corps has made it across the Marne. The French generals are not satisfied. Many are griping about the languid pace of the BEF. After 3 days of light and infrequent fighting, the British are still 6 miles behind Joffre's starting line for the offensive. For the Germans, however, this is more than enough. The threat of danger from the BEF is as strategically effective as being in combat with them. The French, too, have their difficulties today. Joffre's bulldog, Franchet d'Esperey, of Fifth Army, addresses his troops in the morning. He demands that his men rid the motherland of the barbarians. Throughout the day, however, the retreating Germans cross the Marne and move northeast toward the Aisne River, mostly unopposed. They continuously slip out of Fifth Army's grasp. The French infantry cannot keep pace. The French cavalry does not make a good showing either. In the afternoon, some cavalry units cross the Marne at Château Thierry. There is no opposition in or around the town. When the commander receives word that a German cavalry division is to his north, he halts his advance. When General de Mordy of 18th Corps arrives south of the town and asks for a reconnaissance report from a cavalry officer idling by the roadside, the officer says there's nothing to report. The general explodes. It's a disgrace to the French cavalry. My divisional cavalry has already told me there's no enemy at Château Thierry, and you tell me you know nothing. You're good for nothing. Joffre and his generals can compel, hector, and cajole the troops, but after a certain point, physiological limits are absolute. The BEF and the French Fifth have marched continuously for a month, fighting in sweltering heat and catching sleep only in snatches each night. Rations are scarce. British troops are surviving on 4 biscuits a day and a tin of bully beef. They're not allowed to remove their pack and equipment even when they sleep at night, so that they can wake and march at any hour. A profound exhaustion has set in. Rapid maneuvers are impossible. The men desperately need rest. This has not stopped the Generalissimo from continuing to make grand plans that will surely require even more grueling efforts from the soldiers. Joffre watches all day as German units peel across the map. It becomes obvious that the Allied troops in the gap cannot outpace the Germans, which is what a breakthrough would require. They can, on the other hand, remain in contact with the enemy to make envelopment possible. Joffre knows the dangers of letting the Germans wriggle free. The Allied armies must hammer the enemy if this war is to end. By evening, Joffre has figured out how he wants to conduct the pursuit. At 8 o'clock, he sends out a telegram that will feel like an academic exercise to its recipients. Their ability to maintain the attack is dwindling. At 2 in the morning on September 10th, in the frigid darkness of a sleepless, drizzly night, nearly 100,000 German soldiers removed the bullets from their rifles and fixed bayonets. The commander of the German Fifth Army, Crown Prince Wilhelm, the Kaiser's son, has ordered a night charge. When the signal comes, the Germans rush through the damp night air, hoping to take the French Third Army by surprise. The French, however, are prepared for them. Two nights ago, a similar charge had been ordered by the German Third Army, so the French have spent this night on high alert, anticipating another such attack. For hours, the French 75mm guns pummel the attacking Germans, sowing chaos in their ranks as dazed soldiers stumble through darkness, unable to reach their objectives, unable even to find their own lines as they flee. In the confusion, Germans find themselves firing on their own troops at point-blank ranges. Those caught in the crossfire huddle in ditches and cling to mild indentations in the ground, praying for relief. The confusion is compounded by an incredible loss of commissioned officers. As many as 40% of company commanders are dead by first light. Total casualties are not recorded, but they could be as high as 10,000 to 15,000 men. Once the sun is up, at 7:45 in the morning, the French counterattack. The Germans, caught out of position, are only able to resist sporadically. For most units, confusion, exhaustion, and disorientation have left them useless in the fight. By early afternoon, the German Fifth Army will be in retreat. Sarai of Third Army, still bitter from his chastisement 4 days ago, telegraphs a terse, cold message to the Generalissimo at around 2 in the afternoon. Situation satisfactory. As word of this botched attack comes over the lines at Joffre's headquarters, the mood is jubilant. This misjudgment by the Kaiser's son, no less, has assured the safety of the French centre. With the left flank in pursuit of the Germans, and the centre now impervious to assault, the conclusion is unavoidable. The French are winning. All day the German First and Second Armies are in retreat. Stragglers, wounded, and heavy equipment are abandoned by the roadside. But the exhaustion that had hounded the Allies yesterday is even more severe today. Although the generals are trying to goad their troops to march, the men have been stretched past their limits. They cannot keep pace with the fleeing Germans. When dawn breaks on September 11th, it is another cold and drizzly day. In the morning, the Germans take stock of the situation and assume that the retreat can be confined to First and Second Armies alone. While the German General Staff is drafting orders for the remaining armies to hold their ground, a relayed telephone message arrives from none other than General Bülow. He says that the main attack has shifted now to Third Army's flank and centre. The German Chief of Staff, Helmuth von Moltke, knows he cannot allow that to happen. He knows more than anyone how dangerously this situation is spiralling out of control. The anxiety has left him with an embarrassing facial tic he cannot hide. The strain is becoming unbearable. Moltke scraps the plans he was preparing, knowing that a general retreat is now inevitable. At 1:30 in the afternoon, the High Command orders a retreat for the remaining German armies. Their goal is to form a defensive position along the Ain River. German troops on the ground are stunned when they receive the order. Unable to know the precarious situation on the strategic level, the soldiers think the order is a betrayal of the sacrifices they've made. One German officer writes in his diary, "I saw many men cry, the tears rolling down their cheeks. Others simply expressed amazement." Another officer writes how the mood turned into a dumbfounded silence filled with ominous anticipation. The battle is over, or rather, this battle is over. Half an hour later, In his cramped office, buzzing with messages from the front, Joffre feels confident in concluding that the enemy is retreating along the entire line. Knowing the gravity of the moment, he arranges his uniform before summoning a communications officer to deliver a message for the wires. He cables the civilian government in Bordeaux with news it has been desperately awaiting. There is no talk of potential reversals or of the situation being satisfactory. The message Joffre sends to the government is proudly unambiguous. The battle is a decisive victory. But the Generalissimo isn't content to celebrate. He knows that a decisive battle does not always make for a decisive war. He urges his armies forward according to the orders he has issued, to push, to pursue, to destroy. Now, more than ever, is the time for the French spirit to carry the offensive to its limit. But even the weather seems to be conspiring against the Generalissimo's plans. His religious adherence to the offensive has, yet again, brushed violently against an act of God. Torrents of rain accompany the cold spell that had struck in the early morning hours. The exhausted soldiers become bogged down in the mud. The heavy artillery, too, becomes impossible to haul as the guns, drawn by weary lines of horses, plough up the narrow, muddy roads of the French countryside. For the next 3 days, the Allied armies will advance an average of just 9 miles a day. Even the Generalissimo's favourites are starting to question his dogged determination to continue attacking. On September 13th, Monuri reminds Joffre that his troops have not had a rest after 15 days of intense fighting. They need at least 24 hours to recuperate. The next day, Joffre's most aggressive commander, Franchet d'Espery, refuses to mount a major offensive to the north. Clausewitz had summed up the situation well enough when he wrote some 82 years before. Everything in war is very simple, but even the simplest thing is difficult. For all their heroic efforts to win the battle, the Allies are not able to prevent the Germans from escaping. By September 20th, even the Generalissimo is telling Ninth Army over the telephone to postpone its attack and begin conserving ammunition. France has fired so many artillery shells in the first 2 months of the war that they are now facing a dire shortage. At this point, the only thing working in their favour is that the Germans are equally exhausted and facing a shell crisis of their own. In the end, 1914 will become the bloodiest year in French history. In September alone, France suffers 213,445 casualties, over half of which are killed or missing. This tallies up to over 7,000 casualties per day for the month. By way of comparison, the Battle of Verdun will only average 1,250 casualties per day. Perhaps from professional embarrassment, perhaps from the sheer chaos of the fighting, the Germans don't record their losses for September, but scholars estimate roughly equivalent numbers for them. This makes 1914 the bloodiest year in German history as well. The daily casualty rates for the Germans at Stalingrad are around 4,000 to 6,000 casualties per day, still lower than the casualties of 1914. Even as the corpses pile up, commanders of both sides don't immediately realize the significance of what is transpiring around them. For many, this battle is just another episode of marching and fighting, not much different from the slaughter which has preceded it and which will follow it in the future. But surely some gains have been won. The French save Paris, they halt the German advance, and they push back the enemy line by hundreds of square miles. This is arguably France's most important victory since Austerlitz. But because neither side can destroy the other, because both sides exhaust themselves logistically and physically in these early weeks, the war can only stumble on, shocking generals and statesmen alike, with its stubborn refusal to end. Over 4 long years, millions are condemned to suffer the misery and slaughter of the trenches. Gas attacks, shell shock, terror bombings, trench foot, submarine warfare. With hindsight, this will be a joyless victory. When deciding on what name to give the battle, Joffre rejects the convention of naming battles after one particular town or region. In modern war, battles are no longer isolated incidents. Instead, they take place along a broad front, covering hundreds of miles of territory, involving several armies acting in concert. He decides, therefore, to name the battle after the major river system around which all the various battles take place. The Ourcq, the Petit Morin, the Grand Morin, these are all tributaries to one river, and it is from this river that Joffre derives the name. He decides to call it the Battle of the Marne.